The notification chimed on my phone just as I was pulling my famous apple pie from the oven, and David's voice filled my kitchen with words that would change everything. "I can't stand this useless old hag anymore. Soon she'll be taking her final nap and will be spending all her money in Paris." My blood turned to ice as I realized he'd accidentally sent me a voice message meant for his wife, Claire. Without hesitation, I picked up my phone and made one call. "Put our plan into action. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. I'm Margaret Thompson, 64 years old, and until 30 seconds ago, I believed my son David loved me. I'd spent the morning baking his favorite pie for his visit tomorrow, humming old songs while flour dusted my kitchen counter. Now I stood frozen, holding my phone like it was a poisonous snake. The message had been brief, but devastatingly clear. David's voice, thick with irritation, complaining to Claire about having to visit the old hag again. How they were both tired of pretending to care. How they'd already picked out the Parisian hotel where they'd celebrate once I was gone. My hands didn't shake as I replayed the message. 3 years of widowhood had taught me that the people who claim to love you most are often the ones plotting your demise. But this was my own son. I walked to my kitchen window, looking out at the garden where my late husband Robert had planted roses every spring. "Well, honey," I whispered to his memory, "looks like it's time to use that plan we talked about." The plan. Robert and I had discussed it during his final months, when cancer was winning and we both knew it. "Maggie," he'd said, holding my hand in his hospital bed, "people change when money's involved. Even family. Promise me you'll protect yourself." I'd promised, though I never imagined I'd need to use our contingency plan against my own children. Now I dialed the number I'd memorized but hoped never to use. James Morrison, estate attorney and Robert's old friend, answered on the second ring. "Margaret, is everything all right?" "Jim, remember that conversation we had in July about the special provisions Robert wanted in place?" There was a pause. "Are you saying it's time?" "It's time. I'll make the calls. Everything will be in motion by morning." After hanging up, I looked around my kitchen. The pie sat cooling on the counter, golden and perfect. Tomorrow, David would arrive expecting his loving, gullible mother to serve him dessert and probably ask for another small loan to help with his mortgage. Instead, he was going to discover that this old hag had been 3 steps ahead of him all along. My phone buzzed again. A text from Claire this time. "Looking forward to tomorrow. David can't wait for your famous pie." I smiled for the first time since hearing that message. "Oh, sweetheart," I thought. "Neither of you has any idea what's coming. I should have seen the signs earlier, but grief has a way of making you ignore red flags." The changes in David started subtle. Missed phone calls, canceled visits, and a sudden interest in my finances and future planning. But looking back now, every interaction over the past 6 months had been leading to this moment. It began right after Robert's funeral, when David pulled me aside at the reception. "Mom, you know Claire and I are here for you," he'd said, his arm around my shoulders. "But this house is so big for just one person. Have you thought about downsizing?" I'd brushed it off as concern. Sweet David, worried about his aging mother rattling around in a 4-bedroom colonial. How thoughtful. Then came the visits that felt more like inspections. Claire would comment on the antique furniture, the original hardwood floors, the charming old fixtures that could be updated beautifully. David would nod along, asking casual questions about property values and inheritance taxes. Last month, they'd brought brochures, glossy pamphlets for senior living communities with names like Sunset Manor and Golden Years Estates, places where I could enjoy my retirement without the burden of home maintenance. "Look at these activities," Claire had gushed, pointing to photos of elderly people doing watercolor painting and chair yoga. "You'd make so many friends." The kicker came 3 weeks ago when David suggested I meet with his financial advisor friend. "Just to make sure your nest egg is properly managed, Mom. You don't want to outlive your money." Outlive my money. As if I was some doddering fool who couldn't balance a checkbook. I'd been managing our finances for 37 years of marriage while Robert focused on his dental practice. Now I understood their urgency. They weren't worried about my finances. They were worried about accessing them. I pulled out the folder I kept in my desk drawer, the one labeled Important Documents. Inside were copies of everything: my will, Robert's life insurance policy, property deeds, and investment accounts. Everything David and Claire thought they knew about. What they didn't know was that Robert and I had been planning for this possibility since his diagnosis. People get strange around death and money, Robert had warned me during one of his chemo treatments. Even family, especially family. He'd insisted we set up protections, trust funds, legal mechanisms, and fail-safes that would activate if anyone tried to take advantage of me. At the time, I'd thought he was being paranoid. Now I realized he'd been prescient. My phone rang. Sarah, my daughter. "Hi, Mom. How are you holding up?" Sarah's voice carried the same artificial concern I'd been hearing from David, but somehow it felt different, rehearsed. "I'm fine, honey. Actually, David's coming over tomorrow." "Oh." Sarah sounded surprised. "He didn't mention that when we talked yesterday." Interesting. So my children had been discussing me behind my back. "Sarah, can I ask you something? Have you and David been talking about my living situation?" Silence. Then carefully, "We're just worried about you, Mom. Being alone in that big house, managing everything by yourself." There it was, the same script David had been reading from. "I see. And I suppose you both have suggestions for what I should do?" "Well," Sarah's voice grew smaller, "there are some really nice communities where you could have help when you need it, but still maintain your independence." Independence. They kept using that word, but what they meant was the opposite. After I hung up, I sat in Robert's old recliner, the one I'd kept exactly as he'd left it. Even my daughter was in on it, both my children, circling like vultures, waiting for their inheritance. Tomorrow's visit was going to be very educational, for all of us. The morning arrived crisp and clear, perfect for what I had planned. At exactly 9 a.m., my doorbell rang. I opened it to find David and Claire standing on my porch, both wearing the kinds of smiles you see at funeral homes. Sympathetic, but slightly impatient. "Mom!" David wrapped me in a hug that felt rehearsed. "You look wonderful." Claire stepped forward with a bouquet of grocery store flowers. "These are for you, Margaret. David told me how much you love daisies." I'd been allergic to daisies for 20 years, but I thanked her anyway. Some battles weren't worth fighting yet. Come in. I've got coffee ready." They settled into my living room, and I noticed how their eyes wandered, cataloging, appraising. Claire's gaze lingered on my grandmother's china cabinet. David studied the family photos like he was memorizing which ones he'd keep. "So, Mom," David began after we'd exhausted the weather as a topic, "Claire and I have been thinking about your situation here." "My situation?" "Well, you know, being alone, managing this big house, handling all the responsibilities." I poured coffee with steady hands. "What responsibilities are those, David?" He exchanged a glance with Claire. "The yard work, maintenance, grocery shopping, managing your medications." "I don't take any medications except vitamins." "Right. But as you get older..." "I'm 64, not 94. Claire leaned forward with that practiced sympathy face. "Of course you're still young and capable, Margaret. But wouldn't it be nice to have help? To live somewhere where you don't have to worry about anything?" "Like where?" They'd brought new brochures. Shinier ones this time, with higher price points and words like luxury and resort-style living. "Look at this one," David said, spreading the glossiest pamphlet across my coffee table. "Meadowbrook Estates. It's got a golf course, 3 restaurants, and they handle everything. Cleaning, cooking, even transportation to appointments." I studied the brochure. The monthly fees started at $8,000. "This looks expensive." "That's the beauty of it," Claire said, her eyes lighting up. "You'd sell this house, and the proceeds would cover years of living there worry-free." Ah, there it was. Sell the house. And what happens to the money when I die? Another glance between them. "Well," David said carefully, "whatever's left would go to your beneficiaries, as outlined in your will." "I see. And you've read my will?" "Not read it exactly, but we know the basics. Sarah and I inherit everything equally." "Right? That's what you and Dad always told us." I set down my coffee cup. "Actually, that's changed." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Changed?" Claire's voice cracked slightly. "How do you mean?" "I mean I've updated my will. Several times, actually, since your father died." David's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Mom, You should have discussed major financial decisions with us. We could have helped you understand the implications. Oh, I understand the implications perfectly. I stood up and walked to my desk, pulling out a thick manila envelope. In fact, I have copies right here if you'd like to review them. Claire was gripping her purse so tightly her knuckles were white. Margaret, surely you don't need to make any drastic changes. Your original will was perfectly reasonable. Drastic? I raised an eyebrow. Interesting word choice. David stood up abruptly. Mom, I think we should all take a step back here. You're clearly upset about something, and making permanent legal changes when you're emotional isn't wise. Emotional? I almost laughed. David, I haven't felt this clear-headed in years. My phone chose that moment to ring. James Morrison, right on schedule. Excuse me, I said, answering. Margaret Thompson speaking. Mrs. Thompson, this is James Morrison. I'm calling to confirm that all the documents we discussed have been filed and executed as of this morning. Everything is now legally binding and in effect. I made sure my voice carried clearly across the room. Thank you, Jim. I'm so glad we were able to implement my late husband's protection plan. After I hung up, the silence stretched like a taut wire. Protection plan? David's voice was carefully controlled. What kind of protection plan? I smiled, settling back into my chair. The kind that activates when someone tries to take advantage of a vulnerable widow. And that's when I played his voice message. The color drained from David's face as his own voice filled the living room. I can't stand this useless old hag anymore. Soon she'll be taking her final nap and we'll be spending all her money in Paris. Claire's gasp was audible. She stared at her husband like she'd never seen him before, though I suspected she'd been part of the conversation. When the message ended, the silence stretched so long I could hear my grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. Mom, I can explain, David started. Can you? I kept my voice pleasant, conversational, because I'm very interested to hear how you explain discussing my death as an inconvenience that's taking too long. That's not what I meant. I was frustrated, talking to Claire about worrying about you living alone. It came out wrong. Claire found her voice. It was taken completely out of context, Margaret. David's been so stressed about your well-being. My well-being. I repeated the words slowly. Tell me, when exactly did you book the trip to Paris? The question hung in the air like smoke. David's eyes darted to Claire, who had suddenly become fascinated with her manicure. We haven't booked anything, David said finally. I pulled out my phone and showed them a screenshot. This is from Claire's Instagram, posted 3 days ago. Can't wait for our romantic Paris getaway. Finally booked the hotel we've been dreaming about. Claire's face went through several interesting color changes. That's for our anniversary next year. Your anniversary is in March. This post talks about a September trip. Next month, in fact. David sat down heavily, running his hands through his hair. Okay, yes, we booked a trip, but it's not what you think. What I think, I interrupted, is that you've been planning to celebrate my death with a vacation. What I think is that you've been pushing me toward expensive senior living to drain my assets faster. What I think is that I raised a son who sees his mother as an obstacle to his inheritance. That's not fair. David's voice rose. Do you know what it's like watching your mother live alone? Knowing something could happen to her? Do you know the stress we've been under? The stress you've been under? I stood up, feeling anger coursing through my veins like electricity. The stress of wondering when I'll die so you can spend my money? Claire started crying. Real tears or performance tears. With her, it was hard to tell. Margaret, please, we love you. We're worried about you. Maybe we've handled it badly, but our hearts are in the right place. Your hearts are in my bank account. David stood up too, his face flushed. Fine. You want honesty? Yes, we're concerned about your finances. Yes. We've made some plans based on what we thought our inheritance would be. Yes, we think you're too stubborn to admit you need help. But that doesn't mean we don't love you. Doesn't it? Mom, be reasonable. We're family. Family takes care of each other. Dad would have wanted us to look out for you. Your father did want you to look out for me. That's why he made sure I'd be protected from you. David's face twisted. Protected from us? We're your children. And yet here you are, plotting my demise over voice messages you thought I'd never hear. Claire wiped her eyes with a tissue. What does this protection plan mean exactly? I smiled, pulling the legal documents from their envelope. It means that as of this morning, everything has changed. My will, my trusts, my beneficiaries, all of it updated based on a contingency plan your father and I established before he died. Contingency plan for what? David demanded. For this exact situation. For the possibility that grief and greed might make my children forget that I'm a person, not just a payout. I spread the documents across the coffee table. Would you like to read the new terms, or shall I summarize? David grabbed the papers, scanning frantically. As he read, his face went from red to pale to gray. This can't be legal, he whispered. Oh, it's perfectly legal. Your father made sure of that. Claire was reading over his shoulder now, her tears forgotten. What does it say? David's voice was hollow when he answered. It says we get nothing. Nothing. Claire's voice cracked. Nothing, I confirmed cheerfully. Every asset, every account, every penny, it all goes to charity if either of my children attempts to manipulate, coerce, or take advantage of me in any way. The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, David looked up at me, his eyes blazing. You can't do this. We have rights. What rights are those? Exactly. We're your family. You deserve exactly what you've earned, I said calmly. And based on today's conversation, that appears to be nothing. Claire stood up abruptly. This is insane. We're leaving. Good idea, I agreed. And Claire, you might want to cancel that Paris trip. After they left, I sat in my quiet house for the first time in hours, letting the silence wash over me like a cleansing bath. My hands weren't shaking anymore. My heart wasn't racing. For the first time since Robert's death, I felt completely in control. My phone rang within 20 minutes. Sarah. Mom, David just called me. David. He's furious. He says you've cut him and Claire out of your will completely. David says a lot of things, doesn't he? Did he also tell you about the voice message he accidentally sent me? Silence. Then carefully, what voice message? I played it for her too. When it finished, Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Mom, I had no idea David felt that way about you. Didn't you? Because he mentioned that you two had discussed my living situation quite thoroughly. Another pause. We've talked about our concerns, yes, but I would never refer to you that way. What way, Sarah? Like you're a burden. Like we're waiting for you to die. I leaned back in my chair. Aren't you? Mom! Sarah sounded genuinely shocked. How can you even ask that? Because for the past 6 months, both of my children have been pushing me toward expensive assisted living, asking about my finances, and making plans that assume I won't be around much longer. What exactly am I supposed to think? We're worried about you. You're living alone in a house that's too big for you. You never go anywhere. You don't date? I'm a widow, Sarah. I lost the love of my life. Forgive me if I'm not ready to sign up for ballroom dancing classes and singles mixers. Sarah's voice softened. I know, Mom. I know how much you love Dad. But he wouldn't want you to stop living. I haven't stopped living. I've simply started living on my own terms instead of everyone else's expectations. But the will stands. Both you and David have shown me exactly how much I can trust you with my future. The answer is not at all. Mom, please. I understand why you're upset with David. That message was horrible, but I've never said anything like that about you. I've never wished you would die so I could inherit your money. She was right. Sarah had never been as crude as David. She'd simply been his accomplice. Sarah, when David suggested I move to assisted living, what did you tell him? A long pause. I said I thought it might be a good idea for your safety and social life. And when he talked about managing my finances, I said maybe we should encourage you to be more conservative with your investments. Conservative meaning what? Meaning more accessible, easier to manage when I'm too old to manage them myself? Mom, you're putting words in my mouth. Am I? Or am I finally hearing the words you've been dancing around for months? Sarah started crying then. I love you, Mom. I do. But I also have children to think about. College tuitions, mortgage payments. I thought having a better understanding of our future inheritance would help us plan better. There it was, the truth, wrapped in pretty paper, but still the truth. Your future inheritance, I repeated. Not my present life, but your future windfall. That's not fair. Fair? I almost laughed. Sarah, Fair would have been my children visiting me because they missed me, not because they wanted to assess my assets. Fair would have been phone calls asking how I'm feeling, not how I'm managing my money. We do care how you're feeling. No, you care how long you think I have left. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Finally, Sarah spoke again, her voice small. What happens now? Now you both learn to love me for who I am, not what I'm worth, or you learn to live without either. The will is final. The trust documents are filed. The protection plan is in effect. If either of you makes any further attempts to manipulate my living situation, my finances, or my decisions, every penny goes to charity. Mom, you can't mean that. I've never meant anything more in my life. After I hung up, I walked to my kitchen and looked at David's pie, still sitting on the counter where I'd left it that morning. It had been his favorite since he was 7 years old. I'd made it with love, anticipating his smile when he tasted it. Now it felt like a monument to my own foolishness. I picked up the pie and walked outside to my garden. The compost bin was near the back fence, next to Robert's roses. As I dumped the perfect pie into the organic waste, I felt something shift inside me. The old Margaret would have saved the pie, would have wrapped it carefully, and saved it for the next visit, hoping things would improve, would have made excuses for her children's behavior, and blamed herself for misunderstanding their intentions. The new Margaret? The new Margaret was done making excuses for people who saw her as a walking inheritance. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Mrs. Thompson, this is James Morrison's assistant. Mr. Morrison wanted me to confirm that all documents were properly filed with the court today. The new provisions are legally binding as of 4 p.m. this afternoon. I texted back, perfect timing, thank you. As I walked back toward the house, I noticed my neighbor Helen working in her garden. She waved and called out, everything all right over there, Margaret? I saw David and Claire leave in quite a hurry. Everything's wonderful, Helen, I called back. In fact, I think things are finally exactly as they should be. 3 days passed without a word from either of my children. On the 4th day, my doorbell rang at 7 a.m. David stood on my porch, looking like he hadn't slept in a week. Mom, we need to talk. I was in my bathrobe, coffee mug in hand, completely unprepared for drama this early. It's 7 in the morning, David. I've been up all night thinking about what you said. About the will, about the protection plan, about everything. He looked genuinely distressed, which was either very good acting or actual remorse. With David, it was hard to tell the difference. Would you like to come in? He followed me to the kitchen, where I poured him coffee without being asked. Old habits. Mom, I want to apologize. Really apologize, not just try to get back in your good graces. I sat across from him at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd fed him breakfast every morning for 18 years. I'm listening. That voice message, hearing myself say those things about you. It made me sick, not because you heard it, but because I actually said it in the first place. He wrapped his hands around his coffee mug, like he was trying to warm something frozen inside himself. Claire and I have been struggling financially for months. My commission at the real estate office is down 60% from last year. We've got the mortgage, car payments, credit card debt, and yes, we started thinking about your inheritance as a solution to our problems. At least he was being honest. We convinced ourselves we were worried about you, but really, we were worried about us. About how long we could keep up appearances before everything fell apart. David, no. Let me finish. When I called you a useless old hag, when I talked about you dying like it was overdue library book, that wasn't frustration talking. That was desperation and greed, and I'm ashamed of myself. He looked up at me with eyes that reminded me of the little boy who used to confess to breaking my vases. I know I can't undo what I said. I know I can't take back the months of treating you like a problem to be solved instead of a person to be loved. But I want to try to make this right. How? I don't know. I was hoping you could tell me. I studied my son's face, looking for signs of manipulation, practiced remorse, calculated strategy. All I saw was exhaustion and what looked like genuine regret. David, do you remember when you were 12 and you stole $20 from my purse to buy comic books? He nodded, looking confused by the change of subject. Do you remember what your punishment was? You made me return the comics and do extra chores to earn back the $20. And what did I tell you about trust? His voice was quiet. That it's easy to break and hard to rebuild. Exactly. You didn't just steal money from me, David. You stole my peace of mind. You made me question whether I could trust my own children to love me without ulterior motives. I know. Do you? Because the way you and Claire look at this house, at my furniture, at my jewelry, it's not with appreciation or memories. It's with appraisal eyes, like you're already dividing up the spoils. David flinched. You're right. And Sarah? She may not have said the words you did, but she's been just as eager to discuss my finances and my future living arrangements. Mom, what can I do to fix this? I leaned back in my chair, considering. I'm not sure you can, David. Trust isn't like a broken vase you can glue back together. Once it's shattered, there are always cracks. So that's it? I'm out of your life forever because of one horrible moment? One horrible moment? I raised an eyebrow. David, that voice message was just confirmation of what I'd been sensing for months. The subtle pressure to downsize, the questions about my investment strategies, the concerned looks when I mentioned home repairs or travel plans. We were worried. You were calculating. There's a difference. David put his head in his hands. So what happens now? I lose my mother because I was stupid and greedy? You don't lose me because you were greedy, David. You lose my inheritance because you showed me I can't trust you with it. He looked up sharply. There's a difference? There could be. If you can prove to me that you value our relationship more than my bank account. How do I do that? I stood up and refilled my coffee cup. Buying time to think. You start by accepting that the will isn't changing back, that the money is gone, the inheritance is off the table, and your mother is not a retirement plan. Okay. You start calling me because you miss me, not because you need something. You start visiting because you enjoy my company, not because you want to assess my competency. I can do that. And you start treating me like a person with my own wants and needs, not like a problem that needs managing. David was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, Mom, what do you want? Not what we think you should want, but what you actually want. It was such a simple question. But no one had asked me in 3 years. I want to travel, I said without thinking. I want to see Ireland and Scotland, places your father and I always planned to visit. I want to take a cooking class and learn to make real Italian pasta. I want to read books without feeling guilty about spending money on myself. David smiled. The first genuine smile I'd seen from him in months. Then why don't you? Because every time I mention travel or classes or spending money on experiences, you and Sarah start talking about fixed incomes and the importance of preserving capital. We were idiots. Yes, you were. We sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes. Then David asked, Is there any chance, any possibility at all, that you might change your mind about the will? I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw something I hadn't seen in months. I saw the boy who used to bring me dandelion bouquets, who called me when he got his first job, who cried at his father's funeral, not just for his loss, but for mine. Ask me again in a year, I said, after you've shown me that you can love me without expecting anything in return. For the first time since that awful voice message, David smiled like he meant it. I can do that. We'll see, I said. But for the first time in days, I felt something that might have been hope. 2 weeks after David's tearful kitchen confession, Sarah showed up unannounced with a casserole and what she probably thought was a brilliant strategy. I watched through my window as she practiced her approach in the driveway, adjusting her expression from concerned daughter to loving caregiver. Hi, Mom, she chirped when I opened the door. I brought your favorite, tuna noodle casserole. It hadn't been my favorite since 1987, but I let her in anyway. Sometimes you have to let people hang themselves with their own rope. How thoughtful, Sarah. What's the occasion? She bustled around my kitchen like she owned it, heating the casserole and setting my table with my own dishes. Can't a daughter just want to spend time with her mother? She can. But in my experience, daughters who show up with casseroles usually want something. Sarah's smile flickered. Mom, you've become so cynical lately. I prefer the term realistic. We sat down to eat her mediocre casserole, and I waited for the real reason for her visit. It came during dessert. I've been thinking about our conversation last week, she said, cutting into the store-bought pie she'd brought. About David's message and the will and everything. Have you? And I realized something. David was wrong to say those horrible things, but maybe We've all been approaching this wrong. I sipped my coffee and waited for her pitch. Instead of talking about your future care needs, maybe we should be talking about your present happiness. What would make you feel most fulfilled right now? Interesting. A different approach, but still an approach. What do you think would make me happy, Sarah? Well, you mentioned wanting to travel, to take classes. Maybe instead of worrying about conserving money, you should be spending it on experiences. That's a remarkable change of opinion from someone who was concerned about my conservative investment strategy last month. Sarah's cheeks reddened. I was wrong about that. I let fear about the future prevent me from seeing your present needs. Fear of what, exactly? Fear that you might outlive your money and we'd have to support you financially. Finally, some honesty. And now? Now I think that's our problem to worry about, not yours. You should live the life you want while you can. I leaned back in my chair, studying my daughter's face. She was good, better than David at manipulation, actually. This approach was more sophisticated, more emotionally intelligent. Sarah, do you know what your father used to say about you? She shook her head. He said you were the most dangerous kind of smart enough to tell people what they wanted to hear so convincingly that they forgot to look at your real motives. Mom! It was meant as a compliment. Your father admired strategic thinking. I'm not being strategic. I'm being honest. Are you? Because this newfound support for my spending money, does it have anything to do with the fact that if I spend it all, there's nothing left for either of you to inherit? Sarah's fork paused midway to her mouth. Think about it, I continued. If you can convince me to blow through my savings on travel and experiences, then when I die there's nothing left to go to charity, the will becomes irrelevant. That's not... You didn't think I'd figure it out? Sarah put down her fork and looked at me with something approaching respect. Mom, you're scarier than I gave you credit for. I'm smarter than either of you gave me credit for. So what happens now? I smiled. Now you learn the same lesson David is learning, that I'm not a problem to be solved or a resource to be managed. I'm your mother, and I deserve better than manipulation disguised as concern. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Then she asked, Is there any way back from this, for either of us? There might be, but it starts with you accepting that you have no claim on my money, my decisions, or my future. None at all. And if we do that, then maybe we can rebuild a relationship based on something other than inheritance expectations. After Sarah left, I called James Morrison. How are you holding up? Margaret, better than I expected. But I need to ask you something. That protection plan Robert set up, was there more to it than just changing the will? James was quiet for a moment. What do you mean? I mean, did Robert anticipate that our children might try multiple strategies to manipulate me? Margaret, maybe you should come to my office. There are some things we need to discuss in person. Something in his tone made my stomach clench. What kind of things? The kind that require privacy and documentation. Can you come tomorrow morning? After I hung up, I sat in my living room wondering what other surprises Robert had planned. My husband had always been 3 steps ahead of everyone else. It's what made him a successful dentist and a shrewd investor. But what else had he anticipated about our children's behavior? James Morrison's law office occupied the 2nd floor of a restored Victorian downtown. I'd been there dozens of times over the years, but walking up those stairs the next morning felt different, more ominous. Margaret, thank you for coming. James hugged me like we were family, which in many ways we were after 30 years of friendship. He led me to his private office and closed the door. On his desk was a thick file labeled Thompson Family Trust, Confidential Provisions. Before we begin, he said, settling behind his desk, I need you to know that everything I'm about to show you was Robert's idea. He made me promise not to reveal these details unless specific triggers were met. What kind of triggers? Evidence that either of your children was attempting to manipulate or defraud you. My mouth went dry. Defraud? James opened the file and pulled out a stack of documents. Robert hired a private investigator 6 months before he died. He wanted to understand your family's true financial situation and motivations. He what? Margaret, Robert loved your children, but he wasn't blind to their character flaws. He was particularly concerned about David's spending habits and Sarah's sense of entitlement. James spread several photographs across his desk. Credit card statements, bank records, mortgage documents. David and Claire aren't just struggling financially, they're drowning. They've refinanced their house twice, maxed out 6 credit cards, and taken loans against David's 401k. They owe over $200,000 in consumer debt. I stared at the numbers, my head spinning. How did they hide this? Carefully. But Robert's investigator was thorough. He showed me more documents. Sarah and Tom aren't much better. They're carrying $150,000 in debt, mostly from trying to maintain a lifestyle they can't afford. Private schools for the kids, expensive cars, that kitchen renovation last year, all financed. So their concern about my finances was really concern about their own. They need your inheritance. Margaret, desperately. Without it, both families face bankruptcy. James pulled out another folder. But that's not the worst part. My stomach clenched tighter. There's worse. 3 months ago, David took out a life insurance policy on you. A big one. The room seemed to tilt. He what? $2 million? With him as the beneficiary. He listed himself as having an insurable interest due to being your caregiver and financially responsible for your welfare. I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. Margaret, are you all right? A life insurance policy, I whispered. On me. It gets worse. The policy has a clause that pays double for accidental death. The voice message suddenly made terrible sense. Not just wishing I would die, but potentially having reasons to help that along. James, are you telling me that my son might actually... I'm telling you that Robert anticipated this possibility and put protections in place. He pulled out one more document. This is a letter Robert wrote to be opened only if evidence of fraud or potential harm emerged. With shaking hands, I took the envelope marked for Margaret, if the worst happens. Inside was a single sheet of paper in Robert's careful handwriting. My dearest Maggie, if you're reading this, it means our children have shown their true colors. I'm sorry I was right to be suspicious, and I'm sorrier that you had to discover their betrayal. But I want you to know that you're not helpless. The investigator I hired continues to monitor the situation. If either David or Sarah has attempted to harm you financially or physically, evidence will be provided to the authorities. You are stronger than you know, smarter than they realize, and richer than they suspect. The account information at the bottom of this page will show you exactly how rich. Take control, my love. Show them that you're nobody's victim. Love always. Robert P.S. Check account 4437291 at First National. The password is rosegarden2024. I looked up at James with tears in my eyes. Robert knew all along. He knew enough to protect you. The question is, what do you want to do with this information? I thought about David's tearful confession in my kitchen, his promises to do better. I thought about Sarah's casserole and her newfound encouragement for me to spend my money. All of it. Every conversation, every visit, every concerned phone call had been contaminated by their desperation and greed. I want to see the account Robert mentioned. James turned his computer screen toward me and logged into the bank's website. When the account balance appeared, I gasped. $3.2 million, 3 times what my children thought I was worth. Robert moved money throughout your marriage, James explained. Small amounts, carefully invested, completely legally. He created a safety net that you could access if you ever needed to disappear or start over. Disappear? Margaret, your son has a $4 million reason to see you dead. Your daughter knows about the policy. The investigator confirmed she was present when David applied for it. The room was spinning again. They're both in on it. It appears so. I sat back in my chair, my mind racing. James, I need you to do something for me. Anything. I need you to arrange a family meeting, all of us, here in your office, tomorrow if possible. Are you sure that's wise? I smiled, feeling something cold and hard crystallizing in my chest. Oh, I'm very sure. It's time my children learned that their mother is full of surprises. The family meeting was set for 2 p.m. the following day. I spent the morning preparing, not just mentally but practically. I called my neighbor Helen and asked her to keep an eye on my house. I transferred money from my secret account to my checking account. I made arrangements that my children knew nothing about. Most importantly, I called the private investigator James had mentioned. Mrs. Thompson, this is Daniel Rivers. I worked for your late husband. Mr. Rivers, I understand you've been monitoring my children's activities. Among other things. Yes, ma'am. Your husband was very thorough in his instructions. I need to know everything, not just the financial information, but everything they've done over the past 6 months. What he told me over the next hour made my blood run cold. David hadn't just taken out a life insurance policy. He'd been researching my health conditions, my medications, and had even called my doctor's office, pretending to be concerned about my mental competency. Sarah had been subtly poisoning family friends against me, suggesting I was becoming confused and paranoid, setting the stage for questions about my decision-making capacity. Together, they'd consulted with a lawyer about having me declared incompetent. Mrs. Thompson, Daniel said carefully, I need to ask you something. Are you planning to confront them directly? Yes. I strongly advise against that. If they're desperate enough to consider, he paused. If they're desperate enough to take extreme measures, confronting them might accelerate their timeline. Mr. Rivers, my children may be greedy and manipulative, but they're not murderers. Ma'am, with respect, people with $2 million in life insurance policies and 6-figure debt loads have killed for less. His words hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Are you suggesting I should just hide and hope they don't succeed in having me declared incompetent or worse? I'm suggesting you let the professionals handle this. We have enough evidence to bring criminal charges for the insurance fraud alone. I thought about David's tears in my kitchen, Sarah's casserole and concerned smiles. Had any of it been real? Mr. Rivers, I appreciate your concern, but I've been handling my own problems for 64 years. I'm not starting to hide now. At 2 p.m. sharp, I walked into James Morrison's conference room, where David, Claire, Sarah, and Tom were already seated around the mahogany table. They looked uncomfortable, probably wondering why they'd been summoned to a lawyer's office. Thank you all for coming, I said, taking my seat at the head of the table. I thought it was time we had an honest family discussion. James sat beside me with 3 thick files in front of him. Mom, Sarah began. What's this about? It's about truth, Sarah. Something we haven't had much of in our family lately. David shifted nervously. If this is about the will again, oh, it's about much more than the will. I nodded to James, who opened the first file. David, would you like to explain to everyone why you took out a $2 million life insurance policy on me? The silence was deafening. Claire's face went white. Sarah's mouth fell open. What? I don't know what you're talking about. James slid the insurance documents across the table. Policy number 7749382, dated 3 months ago. Beneficiary, David Michael Thompson. David stared at the papers like they were written in a foreign language. Mom, I can explain. Please do. Explain why my son needs $2 million if I die accidentally. It's not like that. It's just, we were worried about funeral expenses, estate taxes. Estate taxes on what estate, David? According to you, I'm spending all my money on frivolous travel. Sarah found her voice. David, please tell me you didn't actually do this. Sarah, you know about the policy, I said calmly. Mr. Rivers has photos of you at the insurance office with David when he applied. Sarah's face crumpled. Mom, it wasn't supposed to be like this. What was it supposed to be like? We were desperate. We owe so much money, and we thought if something happened to you naturally. Naturally, I repeated. But the policy pays double for accidents. The room was so quiet you could have heard a pin drop. You want to know what's really interesting? I continued. The policy requires beneficiaries to be responsible for the insured person's care, which explains why you've been so eager to have me declared incompetent. Tom, who'd been silent until now, spoke up. Margaret, surely you don't think we would actually hurt you? I looked around the table at these people I'd raised, loved, supported, and trusted. Tom, a week ago I would have said no, Today? I honestly don't know. Claire started crying. This is insane. We're family. Are we? I asked. Because family doesn't plot each other's deaths for insurance money. David's shoulders sagged in defeat. Mom, we would never hurt you. Never. The policy was just insurance in case something happened naturally. Insurance for whom? David? You? Or me? I let them sit with that question for a moment before continuing. But here's what you really need to know. Everything you think you understand about this situation is wrong. James opened the second file. Your mother isn't the vulnerable widow you thought she was. What do you mean? Sarah asked. I mean, your father left your mother significantly wealthier than any of you realized. The inheritance you've been fighting over? It's a fraction of what she actually has. I watched their faces as James explained the hidden accounts, the careful investments, the safety net Robert had created. $3.2 million, James said finally. In addition to the house, the investments you know about, and various other assets. David's face went through several color changes. You've had over $3 million this whole time? Your father made sure I'd never be dependent on anyone, including my children. But why hide it? Sarah asked. Why let us think you were living on a fixed income? Because, I said, standing up and walking to the window, your father suspected this might happen. He wanted to see how you'd behave if you thought I needed your help versus how you'd behave if you thought I had money you couldn't access. Claire's voice was small. And we failed the test. Spectacularly. David put his head in his hands. So the will that cuts us out only covers the assets you knew about, the money that could have been yours if you'd shown me love instead of greed. Tom leaned forward. What about the hidden money? I turned back to face them. Back to, what about it? What happens to it? And there it was. Even now, even knowing everything that had been revealed, Tom was still thinking about the money. It goes wherever I decide it goes. And right now, I'm thinking it goes to people who see me as more than a dollar sign. Sarah started crying harder. Mom, please, we can fix this. We can be better. Can you? Because right now, even after learning that your brother took out a life insurance policy on me, your husband's first question was about money. The silence stretched uncomfortable and long. Finally, David looked up. Mom, what do you want from us? I want you to leave. Leave? Leave this office. Leave my life. Leave me alone. All of you. Forever, Sarah whispered. I considered the question. These people had plotted to have me declared incompetent, taken out insurance policies betting on my death, and manipulated every interaction we'd had for months. But they were still my children. Ask me in 5 years, I said finally. If you can go 5 years without contacting me about money, inheritance, or anything related to my assets, maybe we can try again. David stood up slowly. And if we can't? Then you'll have your answer about whether you ever really loved me at all. Claire was still crying. Margaret, please, don't do this. I'm not doing anything, Claire. You all did this. I'm just responding to what you've shown me about your priorities. As they gathered their things and prepared to leave, Sarah turned back one more time. Mom, for what it's worth, I do love you. I know you don't believe that now, but I do. Sarah, if you love me, then prove it. Prove it by not contacting me about money, not asking about my will, not checking on my finances. Prove it by leaving me alone to live my life without having to wonder if my own children are plotting against me. After they left, James and I sat in the empty conference room. How do you feel? He asked. Lighter, I said, surprising myself. For the first time in months, I feel completely free. And the insurance policy? Cancel it. I'm removing their insurable interest by removing them from my life. James made notes in his file. What about the criminal charges Daniel Rivers mentioned? I thought about that. About my son potentially going to jail for insurance fraud. About my daughter being charged as an accessory. No charges, I said finally. They're not in my life anymore. That's punishment enough. But I was wrong about that, because the real revelation was still coming. 3 months later, I was living my best life. I'd booked the Ireland trip I'd always wanted, enrolled in Italian cooking classes, and started volunteering at the local animal shelter. My phone wasn't ringing with manipulative check-ins. No one was dropping by to assess my competency, and I was sleeping better than I had in years. That's when Daniel Rivers called with information that changed everything. Mrs. Thompson, I need to see you immediately. There's been a development. He arrived at my house within an hour, carrying a laptop and looking grim. What is it, Daniel? Remember how I told you I was monitoring your children's activities? Yes. Well, I've been monitoring more than just their finances. He opened his laptop and showed me a series of screenshots. These are from David and Claire's text messages over the past week. I read the first message from Claire to David. She's been gone 3 months. Maybe it's time to try a different approach. David's response. I don't think she's coming back from this. Claire. What if we were wrong about the insurance thing? What if there was another way? My blood ran cold. Another way to what? Keep reading, Daniel said quietly. David, Tom thinks we should wait longer, but I'm not sure we can afford to. Claire, the private investigator she hired might be expensive. Maybe if we make her think someone's threatening her, she'll come back to us for protection. I looked up at Daniel. They know about you? It appears so. But keep reading. The messages got worse. They'd discovered my Italian cooking classes and were planning to accidentally run into me there. They'd found out about my Ireland trip and discussed showing up at the airport to stage a tearful reunion. But the final message made my hands shake. David, if emotional manipulation doesn't work, we might have to get creative. Tom found out about Mom's real net worth. We're talking about enough money to solve everyone's problems permanently. Claire, what kind of creative? David, the kind where accidents happen to people who travel alone. I set the laptop down with trembling hands. Are they actually planning to hurt me? Mrs. Thompson, I think it's time to involve the police. But before I could answer, my doorbell rang. Through the window, I could see Sarah and Tom on my porch. They're here, I whispered. Daniel immediately called someone on his phone. This is Rivers. We need that backup now. Sarah was smiling when I opened the door, but it was a different kind of smile than I'd seen before. Calculating. Cold. Hi, Mom. We were in the neighborhood and thought we'd stop by. Sarah, I asked you not to contact me. We're not contacting you about money, Tom said smoothly. We just missed you. They pushed past me into my living room, where Daniel was quickly packing up his laptop. Who's this? Sarah asked, her voice sharp. A friend, I said carefully. Tom studied Daniel with interest. You look familiar. Have we met? I don't think so, Daniel replied, but I could see tension in his shoulders. Sarah walked to my mantelpiece, where I'd placed photos from my cooking classes. You look happy, Mom. Italy was good for you? I haven't been to Italy yet. Oh, I meant the cooking classes, though I heard you're planning quite the European adventure. The way she said it made my skin crawl. How did you hear that? Tom answered before Sarah could. People talk, Margaret, especially when their neighbors start traveling alone to foreign countries. There was something threatening in his tone that I'd never heard before. Daniel stood up. Mrs. Thompson, we should go. Go where? Sarah asked, her eyes narrowing. Away from here, Daniel said bluntly. That's when Tom smiled, and I realized with crystal clarity that my daughter's husband was dangerous in a way I'd never understood. Actually, Tom said, I think Margaret should stay. We have family business to discuss. Mom, Sarah said, her voice taking on a pleading quality that now sounded completely fake. We know you're angry, but cutting us out completely isn't fair. We're your children, and we deserve something, Tom added. After all these years, after everything we've done for you, we deserve security. The mask was completely off now. Security? I repeated. You mean my death? Sarah's fake smile faltered. Mom, don't be dramatic. Am I being dramatic? Or am I being realistic about children who take out life insurance policies on their mothers and then plan accidents for women who travel alone? The silence that followed was electric with danger. Then Tom laughed. Well, this is interesting. You know about the insurance. I know about everything. Do you? Sarah stepped closer to me. Because what you don't seem to understand, Mom, is that we're not asking anymore. We're telling. That's when I heard the sirens in the distance. Daniel smiled. Actually, Mrs. Thompson isn't telling you anything, but she is pressing charges. As the police cars pulled into my driveway, Tom's expression shifted from confident to furious. You called the cops? I called them 3 months ago, I said calmly. When I discovered the insurance fraud, the conspiracy to have me declared incompetent, and the plans to engineer my accidental death. Sarah grabbed my arm. Mom, you can't do this to us. We're family. I looked into my daughter's eyes and saw a stranger. No, Sarah. Family doesn't plot murder for money. As the police officers entered my house, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Complete and total freedom from the people who'd been slowly poisoning my life with their greed. Daniel handed the officers a thick file of evidence while I watched my children and their spouses being read their rights. Mrs. Thompson, the lead detective said, you're very lucky your husband was smart enough to protect you. Yes, I agreed, looking around my house that finally felt safe again. Robert always was 3 steps ahead of everyone else. 6 months later, I was sitting in a cafe in Dublin, writing postcards to my friends back home, when my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. It was from David, sent from prison. "Mom, I'm sorry for everything. I hope someday you can forgive me." I stared at the message for a long time, then deleted it without responding. Some bridges, once burned, can never be rebuilt. But sometimes, that's exactly how it should be. As I sealed the postcard to my neighbor Helen, describing the beauty of Ireland and my plans to see Scotland next, I realized that losing my children had been the most liberating experience of my life, because for the first time in years, I was free to be myself without worrying about who was plotting against me. And that, I decided, was worth more than any inheritance. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.